Welcome to Pineland Underground, the official podcast of the United States Army's John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, and the best podcast the military has to offer.
Real, bold, and unrestricted.
We're your hosts, Sergeant Major Chuck Ritter,
Major Bobby Tuttle. Welcome to Pineland Underground. Welcome back to Pineland Underground. Chuck and I are here. We're excited to record a great episode today, and we're sitting down talking about the theme of psychological operations, or what we call in the Army Special Operations, Psyop. You have your three tribes. You have civil affairs, psychological operations, and special forces, and we're dedicating this entire episode to psychological operations. We're going to talk about the history, what psychological operations is throughout history, some philosophy, some historical vignettes, and I'd like to introduce our awesome rock star guests, two majors coming from 5th Battalion, 1st Special Warfare Training Group. I have the current operations officer, Major Ashley Holtzman. Ash, happy to have you on the show today, man.
It's good to be here.
And I've got the current Bravo Company Commander, Will Lamb. Will, happy to have you here too, man.
Hey now, thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, so you guys actually just changed command, correct? So you guys each just had each other's positions, or
I just left the position that Will is in, and now
Correct.
Will.
The unfortunate position of following in Ash's wake. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we'll see.
I think he'll do great.
And then Will, where are you coming from before you took command?
So I'm coming from 4th Psyop Group's outreach team, which is kind of a weird hybrid of public affairs, recruiting, and branding for the branch.
Love it.
Yeah.
Hey, what we're also going to talk about is this video going around, The Ghost in the Machine, which has caused a lot of controversy online. We have some people in the room that were involved in that, so I'm interested in discussing that as well.
Yeah, incredibly interested. Ghost in the Machine, if you haven't checked it out, check it out on YouTube, but we're going to talk a lot about that today. Yeah. All right, Chuck, over to you, man.
All right, so in our last podcast, we talked about civil affairs, and we defined what civil affairs is. Within the Army Special Operations, what we define as civil affairs, Psyop, and special forces, understanding that we have special mission units and Ranger Regiment, but we're not including that in our current definition within the Special Warfare Center and School. So over to you, Ash. Let's talk about psychological operations and what it is, and then we'll talk about where it came from.
Yes. So the way I define it to a student or even a layman is, at its basic core, Psyop is the insertion of information into the environment to achieve an effect. Often we target audiences, but sometimes it's individuals. We can't target Americans. And when we're talking about the way we do it, we're using either high-tech, low-tech, or what we call no-tech means. So it can be a conversation, face-to-face. It could be a tweet. We'll tell you some stories. It could be a dead body. It could be anything. Anything is considered information when applied correctly. We often are in all sorts of spectrums of operation. So we'll be involved in humanitarian responses, but we're also doing what we call military information support operations, usually by, with, and through partner nations and with embassies involved, where we're working with our State Department counterparts or interagency counterparts. But then we also have war, and we call that psychological warfare now, Psy-war. And that's when a lot of the constraints are off because we're in a combat environment. The military is the landowner, and we have capability where there's a lot more stuff going on. And then we also have military deception. A lot of people, when they think of Psyop, they think of military deception, the spooky stuff, the things that are not fun, but they're more challenging. And so because the problems are more challenging, your solutions are more out there.
I think this is incredibly important as you look at our current environment right now. So really in competition, and integrated deterrence are kind of the key terms that we're looking at across the way to approach the national defense.
Is that still a new term?
Strategy.
We haven't changed it yet?
It's integrated deterrence.
Still?
Okay. I think so.
For the next week.
But the information environment spreads across before, during, and after. It's completely cyclical. It's involved in every single thing that we should be thinking about, planning, in every way we apply our military, but also the State Department as well, and our other entities within the DIME construct. So just kind of want to hit on how important that is. And what is Psyop not, though? What were you going to say, Chuck?
I wanted Ash to walk us through the bullseye analogy and the spear analogy.
Oh, yeah. So right before the episode, we were kind of talking about. So as an example, the Ghost in the Machine video, there's a line where the creators of the video claim that you see us at the tip of the spear. And we saw some responses from some direct action guys that said that's their quote. Unfortunately, car companies say they're the tip of the spear. Transportation as an entire field in the military says it's the tip of the spear. So like, it's not just their quote. And where the quote actually is derived from is a quote from Wild Bill Donovan when he was founding the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which eventually became the CIA, Special Forces, and Psywar after World War II. So that's where that's a lot of our lineage comes from, that organization.
Oh, yeah.
And he said that the tip of the spear was information. The way he wanted his model of special operations to exist was you first put information into the environment. Then after that, you put special forces into the environment. That wasn't what modern special forces is considered. That's just the phrase they used. But it is basically what special forces evolved into. And then after that, you then insert your conventional forces. You should have those two things precede it. And if we're talking about the modern way that we apply SOF, I would equate that, and the kind of the way the conversation went before the podcast, is the bullseye itself is kind of what CA is doing. Civil affairs is creating conditions prior to the spear even being thrown. And then the civil affairs is also kind of like the shaft of the spear, where they're all of the stuff that's occurring afterwards as well. So if you look at the model of special operations, you're doing Psyop all the time, in forever, in the whole course of everything. But you're doing different kinds of Psyop. You're doing different things when you're below the threshold of war. You're doing different things in peacetime, working with partners, preparing them. But then you're also looking at what CA does, which is prep up front and prep at the back. And they're also doing stuff in between as well.
Ash is such a impressive order. It's kind of hard to top that.
You're just calling me a nerd. That's what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's how we got him on the show. People reaching out and say, hey, this guy is so nerdy into Psyop history that you need to get this guy on the show to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean,
They actually used our Gmail account.
They did.
which is
Well,
pretty
yeah,
good.
well, yeah.
pinelandunderground
Not just
at
you, other
gmail.com.
people.
It's very
I mean,
rare.
Yeah.
Very
So
rare.
the truth is, most of us are nerds in some capacity or another, right? There's this when we look at who is a psyoper, right? We are not just soldiers, but we're writers, we're thinkers, we're filmmakers, all these things, and I think that's why the Ghost Army, right? In terms of when you talk about identity and brand, that's why that Ghost Army is so. It resonates with the regiment.
With the modern Psyoper.
Right, absolutely, right? Because you took a bunch of, you took a bunch of artisans, right, from the United States in the 40s during World War II, and you put them together and said, hey, we need to deceive the Germans to create effects and make it easier for our combined forces. And so it's super neat to be part of that spiritual lineage, and is something that inspires us on the daily.
At the assessment and selection for psychological operations here at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, what are some of those traits, or what's kind of the characterizations or the attributes that Psyop is looking for to hire on, or to select people to come into the regiment to try out and then train them?
Right. Well, what do you think about this, Ash? Because you've been kind of in this sort of pipeline for the last year.
Yeah.
And you've seen sort of who gets selected at selection, and they end up in your course. Right?
Yeah.
So I had a unique. So just before you go, I was recruiting them in the last year, right? So my job was kind of to cast this wide net, but at the same time, recruit for who you want to be in your formation, right? So what do you think about that?
I think so. Up front, I'm going to say something very disappointing to our listeners. Is if there's anything we found from the data, is that there's no such thing as a perfect psyoper.
Yeah.
You might have a perfect ranger, and there's a mold that you want to find. I want to find this John Rambo character, and I know he's real, and I'm going to bring yeah. But for us, what Psyop really is at its essence, when we talk about the Ghost Army, is we are the marriage of the sciences and the arts. So I do want psychology degrees and sociology degrees and anthropologists, and I want mathematicians. We have a nuclear physicist that just went through the course. It could be any of the sciences will make you good at this, because you need some of that analytical ability and also some of that academia grounding. We have a lot of enlisted that have master's degrees. Multiple members of my teams that I've had, had higher degrees than I had at the time when I was leading them. It's very, very common in the Psyop regiment to have a PhD on your team. It's not unheard of. And he's enlisted or she's enlisted, which also brings us to like gender. We've had women in Psyop since World War I. So like as far as like looking at like the diversity of our regiment, we have a very diverse group. It's not like some of the other organizations in the military where we have a lot of people of color that make up entire battalions in our formation, where to be a white guy on some of those teams is actually kind of rare. So there's that, but it's also the arts. So I said the sciences, it's also the marriage of the arts. Like Will, you have a background in film. I'm a writer, and I was a graphic illustrator before I joined the Army. That's not uncommon also. So like we talk about the Ghost Army where there was like seamstresses, like male seamstresses, and people who were into fashion. Bill Bloss went on to be like the Tommy Hilfiger of his day after the Ghost Army. He was incredibly famous. They're doing, it's called 100 Days of Bloss right now where they're celebrating his life.
Highlight what the Ghost Army is real quick for our audience.
So the Ghost Army was a mobile deception unit with roughly 300 personnel. I think I'm saying that. I think the number's right.
This is World War II?
World War II. It directly worked for Eisenhower. So Eisenhower had the Office of Strategic Services, but he also had other things. Office of War Information and the Inc., and then eventually the Ghost Army. There's a bunch of stuff that did influence back then. We kind of compartmentalized it a little. And the Mobile Deception Unit was essentially formed out of this military deception, or MILDEC, that was called Operation Fortitude, which we used, if you've ever seen the movie Patton, the very beginning of that movie where Patton...
George C. Scott, the very beginning.
Yeah, he's in front of the American flag giving what they called the blood and guts speech. That was a MILDEC, where he was pretending to stand up a unit that wasn't real. And that wasn't declassified till like the 90s. So having that in the movie Patton, like they weren't allowed to say like, listen, that's not.
So the audience there was really just fake.
Yeah, absolutely. It was all staged. It was fake. And he was doing this speech, and he was standing up a fake unit because he had just been fired, and they didn't know what to do with Patton yet. But at the same time, the Germans thought so highly of Patton because he was so competent on the battlefield. They were convinced he would lead the invasion.
He would have the main effort.
So
main effort of the invasion.
What better way to deal with that than to just pretend like he is going to be the main effort, and then also stand up all these inflatable tanks and stuff, and that's his army. That when the Germans would do their reconnaissance overhead, they would see this. Yeah, Patton's got an army there, dudes. Like there's
and a lot of people associate with the Ghost Army with Britain, but the reality is that army flowed into Europe. They were at the Battle of the Bulge, correct?
Yeah, so they were at all sorts of events. So they were at the Battle of the Bulge at some point around then. Dr. Seuss had come out to visit them. So it's getting into like the weirdness of Psyop, where something I'll say is often if you see like a ranger who's famous, they're famous because they were a ranger, or not to talk crap to you guys, but like most SF guys who are famous for being SF guys, right? They're not famous on the side with something unrelated. But in Psyop, like our history is weird where if someone's famous in Psyop, it's because they're probably famous, like outside of what they did in Psyop. So Dr. Seuss, Walt Disney, we have like The Moon is Down, written by
Steinbeck.
Yeah,
John Steinbeck.
John Steinbeck himself.
Yeah.
So like these crazy names where you're like, no way they did Psyop. It's like, well, yeah, they were involved in some things, and I'll tell you all sorts of stories if you want to hear them all. I won't stop talking. So,
but it was much more than just like inflatable stuff. These guys were doing like radio deception, making it truly look like there was this massive entity that was about to come.
Yeah. So once they did the Normandy invasion, they then mobilized and took all those artists that we used for that single deception and decided to make a mobile unit that they could task and send all over the battlefield. And so it did.
It looked like a unit. It sounded like that unit. It had signals replication, so they could be picked up by the Germans to look and sound like that unit as moved.
There was audio replication, so loudspeakers. We think of those as kind of a dumb old solution, but when used properly, really effective, especially when you're talking about the battles that were occurring in Europe with hedge corrodes and stuff, where you didn't have line of sight. So if you heard a tank coming, you were pretty scared. So they did that. They would use their terrain to their advantage. So audio, signals, deception, where it looked like the radio signature, and also hearing audio over the radio waves. and they would pose. They did face-to-face deception where they had seamstresses, right? They actually used those guys, and they would make uniforms and patches of all sorts of units, and they would go into the towns and talk loose, as they would say, and they would pretend to be other units doing all sorts of things. And then the inflatables was visual. They didn't look real up close, but if you're doing aerial reconnaissance, and that's how we were using a lot of airplanes back then for the periphery of the battlefield, you would see these things, and it looked like they were tanks. And all they had was like a couple like earth movers, and they would just put those and pretend those were the tank tracks. And they'd make tank tracks everywhere with like a bulldozer.
Right.
So.
And ultimately, right, it's influencing decision makers, right? Creating doubt and uncertainty in those decisions, and that's ultimately what leads to some kind of effect. Operation Mincemeat is a huge.
Just watched that movie.
Yeah,
Heck yeah.
I wasn't like super into it. I don't know. I just watched Imitation Game, right, which is a brilliantly sort of made World War II
What's
film.
Mincemeat about? Because Bobby was talking to me about it last week.
Yeah, go ahead, guys.
I'll let Will.
Listen. I think I'm gonna reveal how dusty my history is here, right? But essentially, the Allies had to convince Hitler that he needed to move his divisions from, I think, the Balkans to Italy, or the other way.
They were trying to convince him. I think that they wanted him to believe the invasion was going to go to Greece.
Right. So back in the 40s, right? You think about what does it take to move an army, right? So once that decision's made, then that's ultimately what they're going for, right? So what they did was they essentially had to. Let's see, how's this go? They take this body, they source this guy, they create this whole backstory for him. They give him a life, and they drop him off in the middle of the Mediterranean with the hope that the Spanish would pick up this body and then fall into the hands of German intelligence officers who are stationed in Spain. So it was this incredible domino effect they were going for, and just the amount of like care they put into creating a backstory for this guy, how he was dressed, how he actually
the pocket litter that was found on him,
exactly,
the way he would have written his like the shape he would have been in at that period of time, what he would have on him. Like
love letters, right?
The depth of background that any German intelligence operative could go and try to figure out who this person really was, and did he exist and have a real life,
right? And ultimately,
truly detailed.
A briefcase, right, with the plans, right? That's the thing that has to get in front of the eyes of the decision maker.
I watched the whole thing because it's pretty rare for there to be a movie about Psyop, let alone a movie about deception and greatest hits, right? So for one, this was the British teams that were doing this. The British did pioneer a lot of military deception. While we were also working with them, we weren't as directly connected to this one. But it is the model. It was written by Ian Fleming, the guy who created James Bond. So as I said before, often when someone's famous in Psyop, it's because they're famous. So James Bond creator decided to make this concept, and it ended up working because, one, the Germans had lost the opportunity to recover a body previously that did turn out to have classified information on it. And so they were really paranoid that they were going to lose another opportunity like that in the future. And two, the Spanish were neutral in the war, but they were kind of not neutral. So they were becoming a fascist government. It's actually infamous in that it's one of the governments that had a dictator who was a fascist who died of old age. Very rare for dictators to die of old age, as they do. But because of all those were like pieces of the dominoes that like actually made it work and successful. The spoiler alert, they fell for it, and it's estimated that roughly 30,000 lives were saved because the Nazis did change and reroute enemy troops to another location. So when they did the beach landing, it was not a massive brutal beach landing like we've seen in other instances. So boom.
Yeah, check it out. It just came out. I think it's relatively new.
It's on Netflix right now. And then if you want to learn anything about the Ghost Army, there's a really good free documentary if you have Amazon Prime Video about the Ghost Army on there.
What's it called?
It's called The Ghost Army.
Excellent.
Easy title.
But talking about the Ghost Army,
Nice.
even fast forward, Desert Storm, right? Another great example of us using a very like entity when we did the Hail Mary
Yeah,
how we
the
used
laptop.
loudspeakers, signal to try to convince Saddam that we were coming through Kuwait.
Yeah. Oh, man, that's fascinating because it also shows that even though we're in the modern era of warfare, sometimes that low tech that we call it, like the loudspeakers and things like smoke,
The smoke tracks going back and forth.
sometimes those are a valid solution. So you shouldn't sometimes our students will come in and they'll want to only talk about high tech, Twitter, Facebook, text messaging, the internet. That's great. But I'm operating in an African country that doesn't have access to the internet. They're all on radios and stuff still. So, hey, maybe I can't use the internet, or I'm in Afghanistan and check it out. There are a lot of internet users in Afghanistan, in the capital city of Kabul. My action is outside in the periphery, so it doesn't matter how much I put on the internet if none of my audience is out on the internet. So those are things to consider.
Not only do they not have technology, but a lot of them are illiterate. So then how do you get that into there?
Absolutely. That's also a factor. You need to look at literacy rates, or you also need to look at the enemy. ISIS was beheading people for having cell phones. Check it out. No one had cell phones. Why? Because they don't want to be beheaded, man. So it doesn't matter how many tweets that you send out. Like, they're not going to read your tweet. So that's when you have to start thinking about, like, all right, I need to go back to the basics. I need to go old school. That's when a leaflet actually might be the solution. That's when things like loudspeakers. So Desert Storm, we knew that a few valuable pieces of information from Saddam about him. One, he did not trust his own intelligence apparatus. Hell yeah. Two, he really trusted CNN and watched it all the time. Hell yeah. Three, he was convinced that we were going to do a beach landing. So let's give him what he wants. So when you're doing deception and that form of psyop, or influence rather, where you're basically focusing on, like Will said, a decision maker. What's really cool about dictatorships is there's very few decision makers. So you kind of know who you're going to target. When you're going after like more nebulous enemy, like a terrorist group, that's kind of harder when you're talking about deception, because decision makers are all over the place. That's how they're successful, is there's not one single head of the snake. Saddam, he thought that we were coming from the ocean. So we set up a whole MEU. We put them out there, and we invited CNN, Saddam's favorite, out there.
So you have a whole Marine Expeditionary Unit out there just off the coast. You're inviting CNN and reporters to live broadcast from these, correct?
Yep. And then Schwarzkopf himself was very involved in this. So this is also another important thing that we should bring up, is PSYOP is most successful when, like, basically a 4-star general is very involved. Because of the way that our authorities function, there is, at times, it takes that kind of brass to really want the efforts to go forward. If they are involved, you'll see some of our greatest hits. That's kind of where it comes back to the Ghost Army was kind of directly managed by Eisenhower, who was a 5-star general at the time. So you can see that, like, oh man, that led to the Ghost Army. Okay, I can see a pattern where then you go through our history. Schwarzkopf was involved. He basically did an interview with CNN saying, like, I'm not telling you guys that we're going to do a beach landing. However, I got all these Marines out here. World War II, we did beach landings. Korean War, we did beach landings. Guess what America likes to do? Beach landings. And so CNN is then like, oh, we got an exclusive scoop, we think. It led to a really great Saturday Night Live sketch where all of those reporters keep raising their hands asking for, like, the war plans. And then, the guy kept saying, like, I can't tell you the war plans. Well, what if you told us the war plans? It was basically that. Simultaneously, when that happened, we also did a massive military deception / PSYOP in the South, where we had roughly 300 people, personnel. That's like our magic number for some reason, where they were doing signals intelligence to make it look like there was a unit down there doing their thing. They wanted to look like a division. They also had chemical vehicles, which we don't have these vehicles anymore. NATO does. There is vehicles in NATO, but we don't have these in our chemical corps anymore, where they were just making smoke and going back and forth. And then we were doing PSYOP, where we were using loudspeakers, massive loudspeakers, projecting the sounds of a division, just kind of hanging out. Tanks starting and driving around a little. Soldiers
maintenance and bunkering down into position.
Oh yeah, soldiers complaining. Yeah. The way that we are.
Maybe just throw some MRE trash everywhere.
Oh yeah, like just blasting it out. And then simultaneously, what a lot of people don't say when we talk about that part is we also were friends with Spot. I don't know what the acronym is. It's in French. It's a French satellite constellation that does geointelligence and sells it. And that's what Iraq at the time, Saddam, was using for their geospatial intelligence. So all of their imagery that could have confirmed or denied this massive pile of smoke in the south could have shown them that, hey, that's a deception. Well, we knew France, and we did this thing called diplomacy, and we kind of just bought out all that stuff and turned off Iraq's access to their geospatial intelligence. So the only thing that was left was their human apparatus. And so we did a few more things to insert stuff. We actually had some Navy SEALs go onto the beach and do like a recon and then come back. But then Saddam's intel apparatus didn't pick them up.
I saw that G.I. Jane, actually.
It got, very similar. So we actually sent them again. Schwarzkopf was like, send them again.
Do it again.
We had to send the SEALs again because they did a good job. And so we had to send them back and had to stomp around, leave footprints and stuff, and
shooting weapons. And
literally, they had to be loud.
Be less surreptitious.
Yeah, and so then that second time, then they were picked up. So that was reinforcing the beach landing thing.
But then we were doing just completely overt psyop there too, where we'd say, okay, you've got 3 Republican Guard units here.
Oh yeah.
So we're going to drop a 15,000-pound bomb on this one, and at the same time, we're going to drop leaflets on these other 2 and say, hey, look, we're about to drop a 15,000-pound bomb on this unit right here, and in a week, we're going to drop one on you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
So have fun.
Yeah.
You might want to surrender.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, go over here with some white flags and surrender.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. So we had deployed 4th Psyop group. The whole group went forward. And our group commanders and everything were very involved. We had a full bird at the time who was in charge. And everyone, there was a all hands on deck effort. So once the deception was done and we did the left hook and we were invading, we started dropping leaflets, like you said. And this was actually a huge stink. There's actually an oral history of recordings of Schwarzkopf written down. I don't know if there's the audio, but he basically said, I will do this. This is my idea. He, as I said, when 4 stars are involved, it moves everything much faster because they're the ones assuming the most risk. It's the 4-star commanders who assume risk and say yes and no, essentially. They can delegate, but they're the ones who are saying yes and no to influence occurring. And he said, I want to release the targeting information, which was top secret. Air Force was really not happy that he wanted to do this, but drop the leaflet saying, I'm going to bomb you. That's a top secret release of information. I'm going to bomb you tomorrow unless you surrender. You can use this leaflet to surrender. And then they flew through, and the next day they did bomb them. So when you're talking about influence and kinetic action, as we say, you do need to follow through on your threat. If you have a threat, it only works if they believe you. So you have to bomb them. Then the next day, the unit right next to it, drop a leaflet. We're going to bomb you tomorrow too. Magically, that really works. And so there was a guy named Jack Sumi who was in that era's version of the KAOK. I don't know what the KAOK is. It's basically the Air Force.
The giant operations center, like you see in all the recruiting videos. With
it was in Transformers too.
In every movie, except the KAOK's
always dark.
Bigger,
and they
somehow on a 152 talking 300 miles away. I don't know.
There's projectors on all the walls.
Yeah.
The whole wall is just projector screens, and every time there's a thing, they say air power all the time. Yeah, it's that. So Jack Sumi was in there as the PSYOP planner for the leaflets that was coordinating with the Air Force, and he was made fun of every day because, of course, he would be right. The PSYOP guy is like, we're going to drop leaflets. It's going to work, you guys. It sounds silly. It kind of is silly. We admit it. But the day he came in, after the first strike had happened, well, all of a sudden Iraqis, by the thousands of Iraqis, I'm not 400, not 100, not 10, thousands of Iraqi soldiers were coming and surrendering. And it was this massive movement of people, and they were all holding the leaflets in their hands, saying they surrender, hands up. It's what we call the unicorn moment, where you don't see it. You don't ever see your operations be so effective that they're holding your product in their hands, saying please let me surrender to you. So when Jack Sumi came into work that day, he was greeted with a standing ovation. It was just this magical magical moment in our history.
That's very cool.
It works. Right?
It works.
Yeah.
But
Measures of effect.
You can apply this stuff back here. So one of the officers I used to work with, I would leave a note on his desk saying, I'm going to take the front wheel off of your roller chair tomorrow. There's nothing you can do about it. Sure enough, I would do it and fall over. And then after about a week of that, everybody was so paranoid that they would come in. That's the first thing that they would do. It would change their behavior to where they would check the wheels of all their chairs in the team room, right?
That's called building camaraderie.
Just basic psyop, right?
Office pranks are the greatest psyop. So
They are. In fact, there's a cricket somewhere under my desk, and for a while I was like, "There's a cricket in here," and I accepted it, right? And then all of a sudden, this cat started meowing, and my DJ alter ego is DJ Cat Daddy, and I got 3 cats, so like they did the target audience analysis on me and hid this like cat in my office somewhere, and I still can't find it.
Like
It cries out
in your
to me.
current
What?
job.
Yeah, like right now in my
there's,
office.
There's
there's
no
a
worse
cat.
place to be when you're talking about office shenanigans than in the room with a psyoper that has a little extra free time.
Oh yeah.
But hold on, I'm definitely interested. So, like, what is the desired effect on you, rather than agitation? Like, how are they trying to influence your behavior, the way you approach coming into the room every day?
So I think
It's a stressor.
it is.
They're
So
probably trying to get you
This
to, like,
cat
say
sounds like
something
it's
to
in. Yeah, they want me to like. Where's this cat at?
So you have to ignore it now. Act like it doesn't bother
Well,
you.
unfortunately,
That is the
yesterday,
power move.
Or
my
retaliate.
first sergeant was next door, and he probably heard me going through the roof, trying to find where this cat was at, because it seems to be coming from everywhere. But
Oh man.
yeah, the office is empty today, so I had some time to go look for it.
All right, so we've hit on a couple of vignettes here. We talked about what PSYOP is. I want to ask you guys about the philosophy of psychological operations.
Okay.
How do you think about that? How do you advise a commander? Just let loose on a little bit of that information.
In order to understand PSYOP and why it exists, you have to go back to the beginning and look at like democracies. So the reason propaganda was stood up was initially because churches wanted to propagate the faith. That's where the word propaganda comes from.
Propagate.
The
I like
Catholic Church. Yeah.
Okay.
This is a great intro. I'm
It's
taking notes.
It's from a Latin. There's a Latin root phrase that is the propagation of the faith, and that's that. Fast forward, and it didn't take off truly until democracies. So you look at like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, where the people started rising up and defining what they believed their version of government should be, which is they need a level of interaction. So post that, governments did start allowing the people to be represented and to represent themselves. And that meant that the people kind of can tell you no. So you didn't have these dictatorships and these monarchies and everything like as prevalent as before. So then governments had to start convincing their populations of things. And that's where it kind of all started. So you look at the First World War, that was huge. But you can go even further back to Sam Adams, great psyoper before psyop was a thing. So Sam Adams had roughly 10 pen names that he wrote under, like fake pen names.
Okay.
Where he was essentially the Alex Jones of his day. And he just like wrote all these conspiracy theories about like the British and stuff. And he helped to manufacture the American Revolution. So the more you read about the American Revolution, you kind of like see like, oh man, like did the people really care? Or was it just like Sam Adams cared too much? And everyone else, of course.
So like an Alex Jones that wasn't off the rocker.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I don't know. I don't want to comment on him because he's commented on the PSYOP regiment recently, and I don't want him to come out as harder.
yeah.
But you see, like that kind of activity is not new. Like Alex Jones is not unique to this time. It's just a normal human behavior, especially when you're talking about attempting to influence populations.
He just has a bigger platform and the means to influence more people than in the past. Right?
Yeah, because of the internet. Yeah, the way that information flows now is same, but not same. So, yeah, when we talk about PSYOP and why it exists because of that. Propaganda needed to evolve as a social response to the way governments were now functioning alongside the people. So governments were communicating to the people. We're in this weird, interesting middle space now where that kind of still happens, but like you look at like presidential press releases and that kind of thing. But now we have like a privatized media apparatus that acts on its own behalf, and corporations kind of own that. And so it's not owned by the government. It's owned by like these interested parties on the side. And that's kind of, I think, what our country's dealing with.
So you're saying there's propagating information, but there's also pushing propaganda.
Yeah, there's kind of like this post era of propaganda where we'll see where it's going to evolve and how governments respond to it, because governments are not technically in charge of all the stuff that the media says in like a pure democracy or in like a country like ours where there's a free press. And so a lot of the stuff that is labeled as what we would call psyop in American discourse is actually just the journalists and the media and freelance and these like people on the periphery like Alex Jones and stuff like that. Those interesting forms of expression where the people are so empowered that now they're at times dwarfing the government as it's attempting to communicate to them.
And then the intent of psychological operations being applied out in theater or just in competition or in integrated deterrence.
Yeah.
What's the purpose?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we're like Will and I, we're in the Army. So we have to still have Army solutions and we have to tackle Army problems. There's a lot that could be said about how much our military is applied to certain things. We look at DIME, diplomatic, information, military, and
Economic.
there it is.
Isn't there another thing there in there too?
Yeah, they added one more.
Is it T?
That's DIME. I just wrote a paper on this not too long ago. What is it? I'll think about it in a minute.
Okay.
There's another letter on there.
There's more letters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The dime became a quarter, I guess.
So when we look at DIME, often what that means for our government is military, and we'll try to squeeze everything else in if we can. So because we're applied to so many things, PSYOP is used as like an easy button at times for that. So we'll be applied to the humanitarian situations where in that case we are actually allowed to what we would call influence Americans, but that's because we're only allowed to influence them by informing them.
Okay.
We can only say the government still exists and here's how to contact it and here's how to get supplies and food and things that you need. So it's kind of that very, very watered down version of influence where you're just communicating. So you're going kind of back to the roots of propaganda, a government communicating to its people. So you want them to know, hey, if you're trapped somewhere, here's how you can get help. If you don't have food anymore, here's where food is. If you don't have power, here's these accesses to these public services. You're doing that kind of stuff. And so that's, I think for most people, pretty easy for us to kind of come to terms with, is I'm helping. But when you look at some of the more nebulous things, it's kind of getting into like the philosophy of war and just war and all those things. So I'm here to help you take out the bad guys. We define the bad guys in this scenario as terrorists. So I want to help them, but I want to help you, combatant commander, by getting the bad guys to pop their heads up so that you can then take them out or do whatever you want with them. I want them to probably talk more so that they can be accessed by the intelligence community. Hell yeah. Or I want to just take them out so I can trick them in some way into all consolidating into the same place, and then you just drop a bomb on them. You're doing things like that.
So Chuck and I have talked about effects coordination cells or effects cells down rounds. A lot of times we like to refer to things as soft effects. But how would you describe, Chuck?
And this
describe,
isn't
what
like
that
a
look
new
like?
thing. Everybody
Yeah.
thinks that this effect cell is a new thing. If you just look at past doctrine, it's even for a special forces company when you deploy and a company as an ODB deploys in the capacity of an advanced operating base. There's supposed to be a fairly robust effects cell. And this isn't new. I don't know why everybody thinks this is new, but I mean, if you look all the way back into the early 90s, this was a thing. So I guess, Bobby, you want to talk about the nuances of an effects cell or all the different things that you can do with it? Or just what it is?
I want to talk what it is real quick, because I think the information operations and psychological operations is a huge part of this. And I wanted to ask these two guys, how do effects get synchronized across fires, civil affairs, PSYOP, and information?
Well, I have a vignette I think that might be easy for the audience to understand. In the southern Philippines, right, we had this foreign internal defense mission. We were there for like 20 years. I think it closed down in 2016, 2017.
OEFP?
OEFP.
Operation
right.
Enduring
Operation
Freedom
Enduring
Philippines.
Freedom for Philippines, right. We had a joint special operations task force down there. And a really common vignette is, you have Mindanao, which is the joint operating area. So it is contested. It's dangerous. You have IBSF Group and other transoceanic terrorist organizations that move through these sort of unsecured island chains from the Philippines through Malaysia and onward. And one of the things you would see often, civil affairs teams would go in and they would do medcaps. I forget the actual
medical civil affairs programs.
Yeah. That's it, right? So the intent is, hey, we don't have access to this village. This village is of some strategic importance, right? We need access to this. Okay, so civil affairs teams will run one of these medical events, right? The Psyop teams will advertise those events and perhaps get people to show up. Maybe in the Philippines, like print products are really popular, especially before the age of the internet. Huge banners, that sort of thing. So they'll take the success of that event and then broadcast it throughout the region, right? And then what you start to see is fighters, right, who were conducting operations out there, start coming out of the woodline, coming out of the jungle, getting aid for their families and that kind of thing. So now you have access to this area. Now the ODA can go in and they're free to do what they needed to do in that space. So when you talk about sort of cross-functional teams and hey, how do I take Psyop, CA, and SF, and how do they work together in a space to create effects?
Yeah. And in the modern world, you might have cyber guys in there. You might have a public affairs officer and a JAG in there for legal things to do whatever it is you got to. Because as we were talking about earlier, what effect are we trying to achieve to meet what end state? Right?
You can also layer your effects. So you might have more than one goal because you have more than one organization involved. You have more than one team making up a team of teams. So you might have your PAO, your public affairs officer, who's then going to do a press release to broadcast, like Will said, the effectiveness of what you just did, so that then the media could be involved. Because you might actually, from doing that whole thing, if you're doing it right, you might pull the enemy off the battlefield so that we don't have to fight anyone, because that's the goal, right, is peace. We want to get to a place where we're not actually fighting each other anymore. And so sometimes that's the effect that you want.
Yeah.
You never know.
Exactly.
Hey, real quick, I gave you 10 NCO points for knowing the definition of medcap because it's pretty applicable. I thought that made sense. So, for you, we usually give officer and NCO points. If you make sense, NCO points. If you're using a lot of acronyms or you're saying things that are just sound like you're trying to write an OER for yourself, you get officer points. So
nice. I like that scoring system.
As a first group guy, super passionate and have lots of time in the Philippines.
Oh,
and,
yes.
And saw that firsthand. And it was always highly successful to reach the populace, to get to the fighters, provide civil services and really life sustainment type entities to the people there, but also to gather information and figure out what was truly going on and where people were or what was happening next.
It's real basic stuff, right? Like in the Philippines, you get typhoons that roll through there every year, right? And so it creates these huge humanitarian crises. And I want to say in 2013 was the Zamboanga hostage crisis. Yeah. So you had a double entendre, right? And the
Officer
nearby, nice, 10 points on the board for me. So the nearby stadium was filled up with all these people who don't have homes anymore, and so the CA teams are going in. We had doctors going in. They're doing water tests, right? Like the SEALs, the Navy SEALs at the task force for building porta potties. And then shipping them out there, right? So it's like anytime we get kind of caught up in this word cloud of buzzwords, it's always a good reminder that it's basic stuff at the end of the day.
I asked the same thing to Rob McQueen in our Civil Affairs podcast, asking you guys this. Does anybody else out there, whether it's in the arsenal throughout our military or I guess the kind of State Department or government sector, do what you guys do?
Ooh. Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, as an American citizen, just driving down the street, right? Like the amount of advertisements and curated things that are coming your way, it's like out of this world. You go to a restaurant, right? The music's been selected, the lighting has been selected, the floor is a certain way, the table is built a certain way. It's all to make you feel something, right, when you go there.
I like giving people the example of IKEA. If you ever gone to IKEA.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
I always get
IKEA
lost
is
in
amazing.
IKEA.
The IKEA intentionally sends you on the escalator to the second floor, so now it's more difficult to leave.
Yes.
And they send you through the maze. They want you to follow a path. They don't want you to have free reign in their store. And yes, they give you doors. You can always get off the path and leave really quickly. But they want you to go through that entire experience. It's like the line ride, right? And it caps off with a restaurant, and then you can go downstairs to the warehouse and be like gifted with the view of like, oh, IKEA has everything.
Yes.
So, yes. But like Will's saying, there's food involved in IKEA. They're meatballs, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
the first thing you think of, right?
Swedish meatballs.
Yeah.
Where are they at?
And their music.
I'm gonna leave my cart right here.
There's also little parts of influence that IKEA does that I really enjoy. All of the books they have are in a foreign language, so no one's gonna steal it.
Yeah.
So that their books are right there. You could look at the book, but you can't. Most Americans aren't speaking that language, so they're just going I'll put it back. But it's complete. It's not like stapled down or anything. Like, there's these little things.
So as we're going into some campaigning, and kind of the thoughts of psychological operations applied in the modern construct, how do you guys approach measures of performances and measures of effectiveness? I.e., how do you know what's working? And how do you know that what is happening and the outcome that you're getting is the one you want?
14 officer points for using mop and mow.
And mow.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, can you guys help us understand that? How do you articulate that to the commander?
That could be a whole podcast episode. To be honest, I'm gonna.
Very short cliff notes.
Yeah,
immediately throw it to Will to see if he has a shorter way of explaining it.
Okay, so. Let's see. We can use the Ghost in the Machine video as a case example.
Let's do that because we were going to talk about the in-depth next.
Oh, well, it's a good segue. I mean, it's an so recruiting. It's a recruiting video, right? So, a measure of performance. Hey, we made a recruiting video. Hey, we put it on 10 websites, right? Hey, it was seen by 10,000 people, 1 million people. The measure of effect, right, is the actual thing that you want to have happen, and typically it's some kind of indicator that you can measure. So
like clicks or views or
so not even that
duration.
So
measures of performance are clicks, views,
right.
Things like that.
Okay,
even interactions.
Interaction. That's the term we're talking about.
Comments.
Right? Exactly.
But you want physical effects.
So for a recruiting video, right? How many people join up? Right? How many people say, "Hey, I want to try this out"? Right? So for instance, with SORB, the Special Operations Recruiting Battalion, said, "Hey, let us know how many people come by and say we saw this video," and that was the impetus for me coming here, right? It's like 80 people right now. And I don't know if we can talk about recruiting numbers, but that's a very large segment of our recruiting mission for the fiscal year.
And it's already been met within, 4 weeks? 5 weeks?
Yeah, it was within like 6 weeks, yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah, a buddy of mine at West Point, he said he's a Psyoper, he's a linguist, he speaks Arabic, he's a 3-3, he's a absolute weapon. But he said, hey, in the last 2 weeks, I've had more people approach me to ask about Psyop in the last 2 years that I've been here. So for me, that's measure of performance. That's a really good indicator that it's working or that it's provocative or people are talking about it. But the actual effect that we want is we want people to come join us. Want them to go to selection and come join our course.
So yeah, we'll get the actual measure of effectiveness from that video in roughly the next year to 3 years to 5 and 7 years, depending on the populations that have viewed it. So the West Point cadets who are freshmen, it's going to take them 7 to 8 years before they would come into the pipeline. Mm-hmm. So those freshmen, we'll see. But the people who are down the street in the 82nd who want to come over, you just have to walk down the street, guys. Go to Ardennes. It's the Special Operations Recruiting Battalion. You'll find it. Those guys walking right in, that's more sooner flash to bang.
Right. That's kind of, so sometimes it's about swaying at 1% to 2% in one direction, right? Those are always the hardest things to sell because it's more intangible and it takes years. It takes years to happen.
Yeah, that gets back to the last question of who else does this, and like everyone does this. If you come into Psyop, you will have a job when you leave Psyop. There's so many things. You can look at. You guys ever go to Aldi? Aldi had this problem, right, where they want to make everything cheaper, less expensive.
I know Chuck probably goes to Aldi pretty frequently.
I go to Aldi.
Aldi's awesome.
I love it. So if you look at Walmart's model of returning carts is to have someone do that full time. And they have cart machines, which cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. And then people who are literally doing it as one of their jobs. And so that's leading to back injuries. You almost always see them have back braces on and stuff. So then that's probably leading to workman's comp. There's all these
It's all about
additional
dollars, too.
funding.
Yep.
And yeah, for an organization like Walmart to not figure this out yet, I'm very surprised. Aldi's figured it out. They just put a quarter device where you have to put a quarter in the cart in order to access the cart.
But you get quarter back.
And you
when
get your
return
quarter
it.
back. So there's the financial incentive. I'd have to bring a quarter to Aldi to get the cart, and I want my quarter back. That's it. It costs you $0 as Aldi. You have the cost of the device on the cart. And so Aldi influences people to return the cart. So they also don't have in their parking lot cart returning kiosk, whatever you call those metal things that like you return the carts in.
Or that you bang your car into accidentally somehow.
Yeah, so that's like
Exactly.
that's one example. But
Okay.
then you can look at all sorts of things where I had another one. Keyed up too.
So, like, I mean, look no further than I won't get too far into politics, but
Oh, that's
politics
perfect.
is huge, right? Because it happens all the time.
And they're
It's-
looking at 1% here, 2%,
exactly,
like you said.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stuff so conniving, where it's like, hey, there's this one district in, say, Alabama, right? And we need to get, saying we, the proverbial we, after they do the analysis on the audience, they'll throw a concert in the county over or in the state over to get those people who would vote in that direction to go to that concert instead of being there on the voting day. So it gets Machiavellian in the truest sense.
Yeah, so you can apply these things to anything. The music industry uses it. The film industry uses it. It's a rabbit hole to look at
Let's
how you apply influence in the civilian world as a civilian. I should say,
Right.
as a civilian,
yes, exactly,
we don't do
yeah.
it to Americans.
Let's
We
ta-
do it to foreigners. Yeah, not foreigners, foreign populations.
Sounds
with
awful,
our
too.
partner forces. So it's not all. We also aren't doing this unilaterally. We're being invited by these countries to help them with complicated problems like narco-terrorism and human smuggling, things like that. That's what we're being applied to.
I'd like to ask a little bit more. So kind of hopping back to Ghost in the Machine.
Yeah, I want to get in the details of that.
Yeah, it's expand
sparked
upon
a
that
lot
if you
of
could, Jens.
controversy, right?
Yeah, sparked some controversy. It's a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. I think that we've seen going up. You guys probably heard about. What would be some of the words you would use to capture the message in that, and some of the intangibles that you feel throughout it?
Well, the intangibles.
It's the hard
So-
part.
I actually don't want to talk too much about the intangibles. Well, here's what I want to say. When it comes to that video, understanding that video, the point is that it does not define everything, because the intent of that video is for the audience to define things for themselves.
Ooh.
So when you're talking about things like deception or even normal psyop or any of that, where we're talking about influencing a population, you can look at something like horror, right? So in the horror genre, the scariest thing in the horror genre is describing something but not describing it too much. You
Not
want
showing
the
it.
reader
Not showing it, yeah.
You want the reader to fill in the
yeah.
blanks, because anything they think of is scarier. Think of any horror movie where like Super 8, where like everyone complained because they saw the monster at the end. They're like, oh, it was dumb. But every part before that moment was great. And so like oh, don't show the monster. Like you can think of this all the time. Like
So Spielberg's Jaws, right?
Perfect.
Throughout most of the runtime of that film, you never see the shark.
Yep.
And I think there's actually, if you dig into
Technical
it, there's actually
difficulties.
technical difficulties with it, right? So they had these constraints. And so they're like, hey, how do we use the medium of film and sound to create fear in the audience without showing them the actual thing? So it actually became sort of a problem statement for us on the outreach team was, hey, don't show the shark. So how do we sell Psyop without showing the shark? How do we convey what it feels like, right? Versus putting a guy in a. If you look at most Psyop recruiting videos in the past, it's literal. It's a guy in a suit pointing at things. It's an embassy, right? This is what we do. This is what we are, not necessarily
what it feels
what
like.
it feels like. Yeah.
Because there's also, so we're always limited in our recruiting because the coolest stuff that we do is classified and will be classified. So we didn't really properly introduce ourselves, but so my name's Ashley, and in my free time I'm a writer, and I write books, I do satire, I love creating things, I'm a graphic artist. My best work is classified, my best work. And it's going to be that way until like I'm 50 years from now, I'll be dead probably. So it's like no one will know until then. But that's like also some of the most difficult stuff is when we talk about this in like a public forum or for recruiting, we can't show anyone the cool stuff. We have to talk about Desert Storm and leaflets, and we have to talk about World War II and signals intelligence from the 1940s, but we can't talk about what we do now. And so that's the difficult thing, that balance.
Right. So narratively in the video, right, what we purposely do is we leave out the whole middle section of what Psyop is, right? It's not that we're going out there and creating revolutions or undermining social movement. That's not it, right? That represents the greatest possible outcome of unconventional warfare or irregular warfare, right? So by not showing that middle part, you leave it to the audience. And that's why I think it's so incendiary and provocative, is because people will have different interpretations of what that is, right?
So there's this interesting aspect of human behavior, right? So this is getting into some biology, so the marriage of the sciences and the arts, right? People believe what they want to believe, and they see what they want to believe, because we make decisions based off of our limbic system. So we have this massive cerebral cortex, and that's all the logical brain. That thing does not make decisions for us. Our tiny little not microscopic, but it's very small, limbic system, where all of our emotions are, that's where we make decisions. So we make decisions based off of how things make us feel. So if I like X, Y, or Z, I'm going to be more apt to believe it. That's why movie stars are in TV commercials, because I think Hugh Jackman makes me feel good. So he sells me orange juice in Korea. You know, like this random stuff. It's because we like them. We don't even know who they are as people, because everything is manufactured that they participate in. Everything that they say is being given to them by PR representatives. And all of their lines are written by people who are actually professional writers in their films. But you look on social media and this movie star is quoted all the time, but that's a quote that they just read in front of a teleprompter. It's fascinating, right? Once we start to look at the details of this. But because that person makes me feel good, I'm going to believe them. This is the same thing. This video makes me feel strange. So now I'm
unsettled.
Yeah. So now I'm going to reach whatever conclusion I want to reach. So while, yes, there was a lot of traction and it did go what we would call viral, and conspiracy theorists have loved.
There's people online correlating it to UFOs and aliens.
Oh, perfect. So, that's amazing.
Go one deeper.
Give it to us. So much more complicated than that. But beyond that, that's not our audience.
Real?
That's not our audience. But that's okay that they're participating and enjoying whatever it is that they're enjoying, and they're latching onto it and trying to make videos about it and all this other stuff. But the people who are our audience are now more apt to actually see it. So because Alex Jones made a video about this, he helped to make it go more viral. The irony of him making a video that was actually kind of critical of this is that critical video is now seen by more people who are our actual audience. Alex Jones was never our audience, but now he has shown it to our audience more. It's this crazy...
It's the Streisand effect, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's exactly
Love the Streisand effect.
So this is also... This is our ability. This is our opportunity to kind of brag
Streisand
about
effects
it too, right?
and stuff here.
What's that?
Are we giving out points for everybody knowing what the Streisand effect is, except for Bobby?
You don't know what it is?
No.
You can observe.
Barbara Streisand, it was like 10, 15 years ago. At one point, an image of her beach house was put on the internet, and she did not like that an image, like the location and image of her house was on the internet. So she, through some, like an agent or whatever, like a professional means, attempted to get it removed from the internet, which then went viral in the wrong way. So now there's a lot of images of her house on the internet. And so
it brings more. So something you want to suppress something, but then it has the adverse effect of bringing a lot more attention to what it
backfired. The exact opposite of her intent has occurred.
Massive. So I think that's a great point. I wanted to ask you guys, as individuals who you plan for the best case outcome or scenario, or the effect you're trying to get, just like in with Ghost in the Machine. But as psychological operations individuals, you can't control what that outcome's going to be, right?
Yeah.
So kind of like that toothpaste scenario of like, once it's out, you can't put it back in. Mm-hmm. How do you advise people, or how do you at least talk about that of, you're going to get an outcome, we're trying to push in the right direction, but it may not be that. And how do you guys talk about that?
That's a real challenge, right? Is that the video's on YouTube. Anybody can see it, right? And I think there's this tendency, there's a tendency for people to be very risk averse when it comes to information or videos or whatever, right? And I think what this has shown is that it's okay. it's okay. There have been, I'm not sure how far I can go here, but there's been conversations happening at a very, very high level of government, back and forth between our senior leaders in Washington, and really interesting because it's created
about the video.
Yeah, about the video. It's created this this conversation that didn't exist before. And so one of the things that with the video is what it is, but what I want in the audience to see in that is a potential future Psyoper. They watch that and they know what it is. Oh, it's idealism, it's mystique. It's using the medium of film and film trailers to, I feel a certain way at the end of this. That's cool. How did I feel that way? How did it get me to that point? So the person that wants to deconstruct that is the kind of person we're looking for, right?
Yeah, I feel inspired. Why? You don't want just the person who feels inspired. You want the person who then takes the next step
and opens it up and looks at all the parts and how does this machine work? Right?
Yeah.
Now, the ghosts in the machine. I'm looking at your T-shirt, right? That specific thing or art piece of artwork is in the video, if I'm not mistaken.
And I've seen those stickers everywhere too.
Has that just been around forever? Or is that
the Ghost Army? They were. I don't remember the artist's name. So the Ghost Army had so many artists that they created entire books worth of content just in their free time when they were like in the middle of this war. And this was one of the symbols that they made is the ghost with 3 lightning bolts.
And the symbol, nobody can see it, but it's a ghost with the lightning bolts coming out of his hand.
Yep, it's a white ghost, and he has the 3 lightning bolts in his hand. So
you see it everywhere. It's everywhere. And what's cool is that it's a sort of identity of the ghost, right? You look at like ODAs, right? Like the team identity of the ODA is so. It's such its own thing that guys will get the logo tattooed on them themselves, right?
We just talked about this the other day.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly, right. Like, and you don't just go in there.
It's built into the culture of that specific team.
The Marine
exactly.
Corps. Have you ever met a Marine without the Marine Corps tattoo?
Exactly. You don't just go on that team and change the logo, right? It is what it is. So what's cool with Psyop is that everyone has taken sort of the idea of a ghost and they've created their own identity out of that. So you look at slap stickers, those sort of things. It's cool to see all the variations of that ghost that started with the Ghost Army and where all it ends up. Yeah, remixes exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's that at the end of the Ghost in the Machine video. So one of the iterations of the Ghost you'll see as a remix is the short clip that was actually at the end of the Ghost in the Machine video, which is actually from an old Betty Boop cartoon. We saw all sorts of comments on the Ghost of the Machine video where people were like, "Oh, look at this ghost! It's so unfair." Like they very clearly have not seen old black and white Betty Boop cartoons because they don't know where that image is.
It's like 15 frames per second. It's like an unsettling filmic kind of ethereal. I don't know. It's unsettling. So back last summer, right? A former NCO of mine was like, "Hey, look at this ghost. This is what I use in my presentations." And I looked at that and was like, oh, geez, like I don't like that at all. That's unsettling. I don't like the way he's bending over. His legs are too long. Like this doesn't make it's weird. And so when we went back and we looked at the original video, there's this moment where a witch and there's this clown that's dancing.
The old Betty Boop cartoon.
Exactly.
Which is unsettling in itself, right? Clowns are creepy.
Yeah.
Creepy.
So creepy. So the clown's dancing and the witch reveals the clown to be a ghost, right? And so when you look at Ghost in the Machine as this sort of philosophical idea of yin and yang, man and machine, the body and the mind. The idea that this clown is being revealed to be a ghost is a really interesting sort of dualism in what light and darkness, deception and truth, a clown and a ghost, and so that was kind of. That was really the inspiration point.
I mean, I'm seriously having anxiety just thinking about a clown right now. Just thinking about the videos. It is so super creepy. It's weird.
I wanted to ask you, so you just hit light and dark, truth and deception. Can you tell us about the history of the flash that I have here on my beret of the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, which you'll see it on our logo if you look at it on our websites or anything like that. But essentially the background is you have the black portion, the white portion, the gray portion,
right,
and the gold, the Asian gold outline. But do you guys know the history of the 3 colors?
Yeah, so back in the day, this was not called USA JFK SWCS. It was called the Psychological Warfare Center, and that's actually where Psy War started, and then that's where Special Forces grew out of. So I'm not going to go into all the details and then like try to play that like who came first, because we did, and it's recognized by the USAC historian. But
Lay it all out.
But whatever.
But back to the colors, though.
The colors are white, gray, and black Psyop. So what we call vanilla Psyop, the humanitarian stuff, everything,
Overt.
100% truth. You have to. Then gray Psyop, where it's 99% truth, and you're adding more of the influence, that kind of that more who is the originator of this information, where is this coming from, what is the intent, more obfuscated.
Attribution or non-attributable.
Well, that's black Psyop.
Okay.
Where we call it clandestine operations.
Cut that
Where
portion out.
so that's black Psyop, where you're not saying who derived it. It's not going to be usually attributed to the United States, usually with our partners that we're working with, because we want to prop them up and support them.
And it's fascinating for any of our cadre or listeners if they're not as familiar with, we walk that on our berets right now. So thanks, thanks for the history lesson. That's really good.
Even seeing the SWCS, the horse symbol, like that, the horse in the SWCS symbol is the Psyop horse. And that's what that's referencing is. It references two things, right? The Trojan horse, for one of the greatest military deceptions of all time. Whether or not it happened, doesn't matter. We take it. And then also a chess piece, which more the nerdier part. But Will, you were also going to say the Psy symbol. So if you look at the original design from the heraldry office, the kettle that we have is supposed to have a Psy, like the Greek Latin symbol, the Psy, in the middle of it. And so that's also something that if you look at if the origin of even that symbol is also a Psyop symbol. That's what the kettle is the kettle is actually surrounding. It's in the shape of a Psy. Pretty fascinating.
But it's not. It just wasn't something that was added to the
Over time, the Psy symbol was taken out.
Gotcha.
So this is one of those things where like we kind of take Psyop out of the history of SOF sometimes. And by we, I mean just other SOF organizations inside SOF, They they don't want to put it on their Wikipedia pages that like, and we were stood up here out of nothing. We're just out of nothing. So you even have one of the SF groups has the Trojan horse still as their symbol.
Yeah, 10th Special Forces Group primarily. What does a Psyop team look like? What's the construct of a Psyop team? We've talked about a civil affairs team with Rob McQueen. We talked about Special Forces ODA. Can you guys just hit on that real quick? What does a Psyop team look like?
So this is interesting because it's changing, or is in the process of changing. It used to be, in my experiences, right, it was typically, I had a detachment, right, which was 8 to 10 folks, and then we would be piecemealed out for missions, right? So it was very common to be in a 2-man team at an embassy in, say, Bangladesh or in Sri Lanka. And so what we've moved away from is that sort of piecemealing of the unit of action, and we've moved to what's called a psychological operations detachment, so a PsyDet. And it's a 12-man team, right, which sounds familiar. Yeah. And so that is now the unit of action. So that team will deploy, and then they potentially could split up, right, to cover operations, at least from a regional perspective. Mm-hmm. If you're supporting a U.S. embassy or global combat commander.
My experience has usually been when I'm working with a special forces guy, it's the first time they've ever met one of us in the field. And so there's always kind of that conversation that you have to start of like, here's what I do, here's my understanding of how I can help you. And then you kind of go back and forth so that they can understand like, I'm not just the leaflet guy. And especially when it comes to special forces and working with like Navy SEALs or a Ranger, like I need to make sure they understand that like, hey, I can do that, but let's talk about what you want to do and what your mission is, and let's go in that direction. I'm not trying to take us in another direction.
I mean, it's always like, hey, you get the psychological operation, but like, what can we do? But especially just for the commander, advise us on where the legalities are. Like what, like what's the limit of what we can do, and that we can't do. The partner force might be able to do it, but keep us out of trouble here, right? And then that's like, okay, we can do all this. That sounds great, but we can't quite do this.
And that's where the JAG always comes in, right? Is you want to make sure your lawyer is tied in with all of those conversations so that we're following the laws of armed conflict and all these other things. The way influence works is it can very quickly go off the rails into very high levels of approval processes when it comes to just authorities and stuff like that.
And then you psyop yourselves because then the hire's like, wait a minute, you guys are doing this is illegal. No, we're not doing that. We were just making it seem like we were doing that.
We were
Yes.
pretending to fake.
Yeah, because that's happened before. Like that didn't actually happen. We were just playing the games down here. And
My favorite moment as a PSYOPer has always been when the intelligence section of whatever organization I'm working with has to approach me and ask me if this is real.
yep, there you go.
Yes.
Is this real or is this you? That's me.
Tell me about the billboard. Remember your billboard analogy?
So here's a hypothetical that we sometimes bring up to our students so they can understand some of the concepts of nesting what we call like a PSYOP within a PSYOP,
Okay.
where you're layering your effects and you have an overt effect
Where it's
where
layered soft effects.
exactly. So if we were talking about white, gray, and black, which is no longer in our doctrine, but we still kind of reference it sometimes, versions of PSYOP, and you wanted to do all three at the same time, you could. So let's transport ourselves back to 2005 Iraq. The insurgency is a thing, and we're there, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to tackle this problem. So if I was in 2005 Iraq, and I suddenly put up a billboard with an American flag on it and said, "We're here to help you," what would happen to that billboard? Probably get destroyed, right? Yeah, because one, it's tone deaf. Two, it's what's it really trying to accomplish? Whatever. Like this very like hearts and minds, overt, vanilla, but again, tone deaf billboard.
And then how many people can actually read that too?
Yeah, who knows? Like it could. Who cares? You know. But they know what the American flag is by now. So it's gonna probably get destroyed. But what if that's not the point? What if I know it's gonna get destroyed? What if I have an infantry buddy of mine who's always going out on patrol, and I can say like, "Hey, tell me how long this thing lasts," and he goes out every day, and he comes back. And he goes out the first day and comes back and says like, "Hey man, your billboard's already gone." Heck yeah. Now I know it lasts a day. So now I can put 10 of these things out. Boom. 10 American flag, we're here to save you billboards. Let's do this together, you guys. We're going to stop this and we're helping you, and all these things that aren't really happening right because they can just look around them and say like that's wrong, and they're going to have an emotional visceral reaction to this billboard. And they're probably going to destroy it. Well, spoiler alert, no one destroys a billboard from 2 miles away. They're right there. And this is war, right? This is conflict. So we're the landowner, which means we have intelligence assets like UAVs, and we can soak those 10 billboards. And I can follow that person home that just destroyed my billboard. And when I go to their place, and I see where they go, and I find out about them, we can use other intel and determine whether or not this is just some angry kid, some terrorist, or something else. If it is a terrorist, though, we can then continue to follow him, and when that terrorist cell is destroyed, they will never know it was because of my crappy billboard. No one will know. In fact, everyone on the FOB that isn't us, that's not read into this, can be, "Oh, PSYOP, yeah, they make American flag billboards and stuff." And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them not even understanding what I'm doing. I'm very much okay with them not realizing that like I'm playing 4D chess when they think I'm playing like, Scrabble over here in the corner.
All right, guys, we've had a pretty awesome discussion today. Some incredible themes along the line of psychological operations, some historical vignettes, some application in the modern realm of the information domain, and really the competition and integrated deterrence and how you guys fit together. Any closing comments from Will and Ashley? Anything you guys want to leave our listeners with?
When I'm talking to someone who's thinking about coming over, I always make sure that I ask them what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So I've mentored more than one person into Special Forces. I've mentored more than one person into CA because they frankly were more fit for those roles. And so hopefully the goal of this podcast is so that Special Forces and CA folks and anyone else better understands what PSYOP kind of is and what our goals are so that they can mentor people into this direction. Are you a super nerd? Are you a computer nerd? We got a place for you. Are you an artist? We got a place for you. Are you into the sciences and you want to apply your degree and you know all this crazy stuff about like survey methodology or statistics or even mathematics, and you want to think, is there a place for me in the Army? Like, yes, 100%, and it's with us. Like, we got a place for you. There's all kinds of stuff. Are you a DJ in your free time like Will is? Or a wedding photographer or videographer like Will is? So, heck yeah, come to the dark side. We got a place for you, and we're very willing to put you to work.
Yes, because at the end of the day, it's about storytelling. Right? How do you tell that story? It can. The medium doesn't matter. It's, are you a storyteller? And if you are, then
yeah. And do you want to be creative? So when I was in school, I was into the arts and I was doing videos in my free time all the time. I was wasting a lot of time doing that, and I was a sociology major, which I majored in sociology assuming that I would never apply it ever. I just liked it because it was interesting to me. I found out that the Army does have a place for that. It does have a place for someone who majors in sociology and makes videos in their free time. It's called Psyop, and we're always looking for more, and it could be anyone. Just like we said at the beginning, like, there is no such thing as the perfect Psyoper. If you look at one of us, that's it. You've met one. Every single one of us is different, and we're an entire regiment of individuals, and that individuality is what makes the Psyop regiment the Psyop regiment.
Hell yeah. But you still get to jump out of airplanes and go across the globe and
That's right.
work with other incredible people too. Chuck, over to you, man. Any closing comments?
No, thank you guys for coming on the show. And I want to know about the video and just all the stuff within it and talking about psychological operations throughout history. So it's been awesome for me. And I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Heck yeah. Well, I
Appreciate it.
appreciate the time, and yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, thanks.
yes, thank you.
Ashley Holtzman and Will Lamb, thanks for being on Pineland Underground. We'll see y'all next time.
What does a sprinter eat for food?
Nothing.
They fast. Exactly.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thanks for joining us today in Pineland Underground, the U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and Schools official podcast.
Please tune in to our next episode. We release episodes every 2 weeks.
You can reach us at pinelandunderground@gmail.com. Check it out.